Okay, you can start and then I'll go.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to a very exciting event between Boston College and our amazing team of ladies from Envoy in Connecticut. And here to guide you through today's event is your moderator, NPDL's Assistant Director, Brittany Lamar. Brittany, take it away.
All right. Good afternoon, friends, supporters, and honored guests. You are all about to witness an unforgettable display of intellectual ability and social diplomacy as our teams from Boston College and YCI's Envoy convene for a policy debate on the following topic. Resolved, the United States should enact term limits for Supreme Court justices. Boston College, coached by John Katsoulis, will argue in the affirmative, supporting this resolution, while Envoy, coached by Joe Schatz from Binghamton University, argues in the negative position, refuting the affirmative's case. Each debater will be judged upon the following criteria: analysis, reasoning, evidence, organization, refutation, and delivery. The three very distinguished judges of today's debate are Danielle Vernio-Gorman, Director of Debate at the U.S. Naval Academy, Samantha Godby, Director of Civics Institute and Debate Coach for Fairmont State, and Jared Atchison, Professor and John Kevin Medical Director of Debate at Wake Forest University. As today's moderator, I will introduce our debaters individually, and they will adhere to their specified time limits. A digital timer will be displayed on the screen, and speakers' microphones will be muted if they exceed their time limits. At the conclusion of the debate, our judges will tally up each team's cumulative point totals to determine the winner of today's contest. With all that said, it's now time to expand our minds and start the debate. Presenting the affirmative team's first constructive argument for 7 to 9 minutes, John Sexton. John is a junior majoring in political science, and he's from Houston, Texas.
It's time to start on my first word.
Yeah, it'll be once, in the opening remarks, it'll be on your first intentional audible.
Perfect. The status quo policy of granting lifetime tenure to Supreme Court justices is disadvantageous for 4 reasons. First, Supreme Court justices are serving for much longer terms than envisioned by the founding fathers. The first 10 judges of the Supreme Court served on average for 8 years. Since 1990, the average time served has increased to 26.3 years. The past 5 judges who have left the court have served longer than 26 years. Ginsburg for 27, Kennedy for 30, Scalia for 29, Stevens for 35, and Breyer for 28. The problem with life tenure, wrote journalist Stuart Taylor in 2019, is that some justices will remain in the court until mentally debilitated, or at least until past their prime, as did Justice William O. Douglas. Empirical evidence supports this point. A study by University of Pittsburgh law professor David Garrow identified 11 Supreme Court judges during the 20th century who experienced impaired mental capacity before vacating their seats. The problem with second problem with life tenure is that appointments to the court are rare, unpredictable, and allocated in an inequitable way. These factors have made the nomination process partisan and politicized. Future appointments to the court will be exceedingly rare, according to a study done by David Fishbaum of the management consulting firm Oliver Wyman and reported in the Washington Post on September 22nd, 2020. Using standard statistical methods and assumptions, he estimated there will be only 25 new Supreme Court appointments over the next century, compared with 47 in the previous 100 years and 60 between 1869 and 1969. The appointments are also unpredictable due to unplanned deaths and strategic retirements by judges. As a result of these random events, the composition of the Supreme Court does not accurately reflect the outcome of democratic elections, and Republicans have nominated a disproportionate number of judges. Daniel Epps, a Washington University law professor, wrote in 2022, even though Democrats controlled the White House for 20 of the 52 years between 1968 and 2020, happenstance and other factors meant that Democrats appointed only 4 justices during that time, while Republicans appointed 15. Due to the rarity and unfairness in the allocation of Supreme Court seats, the confirmation process is partisan and dysfunctional. Alicia Bannon and Michael Milov Cordova of the Brennan Center at NYU Law observed in 2023 that nominees are increasingly confirmed on near party line votes, regardless of their underlying merit. And Chief Justice Roberts is the only sitting justice to have received the support of a majority of senators not in the nominating president's political party. The dysfunction of the process became evident when Republicans refused to even allow a vote on Merrick Garland. This radical step, Bannon and Milov Cordova explained, broke a norm of more than 100 years to evaluate every Supreme Court nominee's fitness for office. A third problem with life tenure is that most qualified judges are not being appointed to the court. Rather, lifetime tenure causes presidents to pick the youngest available nominee. Consider at the moment Trump's 3 nominees. Gorsuch was 49, Kavanaugh 53, and Barrett 48. Trump gave zero consideration to any judges in their late 50s or early 60s because they might not serve long enough. This trend of appointing younger justices is not unique to Trump. Biden nominated 52-year-old Ketanji Jackson to the court. Gwen Guilford, a reporter for Quartz, noted that the average age of Supreme Court nominees has declined from an average age of 58 during the 1930s to 51.7 after Gorsuch's swearing in. According to Norman Ornstein of American Enterprise Institute, adopting 18-year term limits would open up opportunities for highly qualified candidates in their late 50s and early 60s who are now largely ignored by presidents. He gave the example of George W. Bush citing against nominating the superbly qualified J. Harvey Wilkinson, the chief judge on the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, because he was deemed too old. At the time, Wilkinson was only 62. Enacting 18-year term limits will produce the best qualified judges. Attorney Kara King, writing in Fordham Law, Voting Rights and Democracy Forum in 22, stated that shortening tenure to 18 years would eliminate the incentive to view age as a primary qualifier and subsequently allow presidents to focus on actual judicial qualifications. The fourth problem with life tenure is that it's more likely to produce a court with extreme ideological imbalance. This is starkly evident today, where we have a Supreme Court dominated by 6 conservative judges. This happened due to untimely deaths, strategic retirements, and Senate obstruction. But today's situation is not an anomaly. In fact, it's a norm with life tenure. An empirical study conducted by University of Chicago law professor Adam Chilton and published in the Southern California Law Review in 2021 examined how often extreme and ideological imbalance, defined as having a 75% or more of the seats on the Supreme Court appointed by one party, exists under life tenure compared with term limits. The study found that from 1937 to 2020, under life tenure, ideological imbalance existed 59.5% of the time. In contrast, the study found that 18-year term limits would have reduced ideological imbalance by 50%. Having an imbalanced court is harmful for several reasons. First, it leads to doctrinal instability. We've witnessed over the past 2 court terms where the conservative-dominated court has reversed longstanding precedents on abortion, affirmative action, guns, and voting rights. Second, the court loses its democratic legitimacy when it issues rulings which are consistently outside the mainstream public opinion. Bannon and Milov Cordova of the Brennan Center observed that public confidence in the court has plummeted due to issuing rulings which are unmoored from the values of the American public. Polling by both Gallup and Pew find that Americans have the lowest trust in the Supreme Court since they began polling in 1972. Loss of court legitimacy is dangerous because it erodes respect for the rule of law. Law professor Daniel Epps warned in 2022 that for social peace, we need people to believe that it's better to continue living under pre-existing arrangements, however imperfect, and that this is a necessary prerequisite to having a rule of law. To solve for these harms of life tenure, the affirmative team advocates for the adoption of term limits reform plan outlined in 2023 by the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. According to the American Academy, their term limits plan would involve the following details. Future presidents would appoint 2 new justices during each term, giving presidents flexibility regarding the timing of their nominations, which would help to prevent impasses in the Senate. Judges would serve actively for 18 years, after which they would remain in office but take senior status with a diminished set of duties. The current Supreme Court justices would be permitted to remain in active service as long as they wish. This would temporarily expand the court. Ultimately, though, the court would stabilize at 9 justices and remain at that size indefinitely. In the event of an unexpected vacancy, a new justice would be appointed to fill the remainder of that term. After Chief Justice Roberts leaves the bench, the Chief Justice role would be selected by a vote of the sitting justices. Justices appointed under this new system would remain in office for the purposes of the Good Behavior Clause, even after the conclusion of their 18 years of active service. The system can be implemented by statute without running afoul of the Constitution. The American Academy plan was devised by leading legal scholars, and the plan will reduce partisanship, restore legitimacy, and preserve judicial independence. Allison Durkee wrote in Forbes magazine on October 25th, 2023, a working group of scholars at the American Academy of Arts and Sciences would establish an 18-year term limit for the Supreme Court justices. Doing so would preserve judicial independence while improving the court's reputation and reducing the incentives for strategic requirements and political campaign-style efforts focused on the nominations process. Setting an 18-year limit is in line with how long the average justice has historically served on the court, and means more presidents would be able to predictably appoint 2 justices per term without a single president being able to appoint a majority of justices on the court. With the group predicting that it would take until 2047 for there to be 9 justices on the court, the working group's members include experts such as U.S. Circuit Judge Diane Wood, Harvard Law professor Charles Freed, and scholars from Yale, Georgetown, Harvard, and Pennsylvania Law.
Thank you. All right. All right. Providing cross-examination for the negative team for 1 to 3 minutes, Chastity West. Chastity is a graduate of Wesleyan University, a member of Phi Beta Kappa, and a published writer. She is a peer mentor who is committed to uplifting and empowering those in her community.
So are you suggesting that age is the only factor that contributes to mental decrepitude?
We're not suggesting the only factor, but we're suggesting that it's a really major factor in this process.
So what do you suggest should be the cutoff age for nominating and confirming?
We're not saying that there should be a cutoff age, but rather we're saying that there should be 18-year limits because that's how it's historically worked, and we've seen a lot less mental debilitation in that period.
Incidentally, what's the average age of the current court?
I'm sure you could tell me. I don't have that off the top of my head.
64. And are you do you know what the average age is at the time of appointment?
We were saying in our case right now, they're choosing people in like their low 50s.
Okay. So at what age do you suppose? So I'm assuming that your plan is retroactively applied.
Sure. Or I mean, we're saying we'd apply it now.
Okay. So what age do you suppose we start kicking people off the court?
We're not saying we kick people off the court. We're just saying after 18 years is when their limits expire. But we would say that creates more qualified judges because it'll increase the range of ages that presidents have to choose from, and they'll be more likely to choose someone who's like in their 60s, perhaps.
Okay. So how does the affirmative justify your plan at a nebulous term of 18 years? Say, will that change to say like 12 once or 20 once your advantages fail?
No, we don't contend our advantages will fail, and so we say 18 years will stay as the limit.
Okay. In terms of doctrinal instability, how do you justify that rotating justices in and out or having this turnover every 2 years supports doctrinal stability?
So we're not actually saying that there would be turnover every 2 years, we're just saying there would be new nominations every 2 years, but it would still be, they have 18 years in office. And so it would still remain relatively stable, especially compared to today, where you have judges coming in and staying until way past their mental capacities are essentially expired for that role.
All right, so expired.
Not expired, I misspoke.
Okay,
I'd say impaired.
all right, I'm here. Okay, nice. Okay, so you're in favor of novices over experience?
The exact opposite, actually. We're saying right now, presidents are choosing artificially younger nominees solely because they think they can stay in office longer with a life term.
So how is it that you equate inexperience, like what like you mentioned that Trump specifically chose people who are younger, specifically so that they would have like a longer time to serve in the court. Like, where are you getting that from? Like, where are you drawing that evidence from?
We drew the evidence from just history. If you look at the numbers in the past, presidents would choose justice as old as 60, but now it's been as low as 50s.
Bridget, can I ask where the clock is?
Or you guys are at time. That's 3 minutes.
Yeah, it's hard to see your clock because you're a small square, and then the square with the timer is even smaller. So, yeah.
I can't see it at all.
Okay. Yeah,
No.
that's small. Okay, so I'll stand here and I'll just point up fingers.
Okay.
Okay. And then at the end, Danielle, people are going over because it's hard to see the clock. If you could do what you just did, that'd be great.
Absolutely.
Presenting the negative team's first constructive argument for 7 to 9 minutes, Beth Carpenter. Beth is admitted to the bars of New York, Connecticut, and the District of Columbia, currently working as a Braille transcriber with 3 certifications and working as a Connecticut representative beta testing for Nemeth Code for mathematics and science.
Thank you, judges, for being here, and to my opponents for the wonderful speech. Despite what the affirmative claims, term limits on Supreme Court justices will not solve the growing problems of discontent and the politicization of the court in recent years. In fact, it will only further politicize the court, lead to constitutional crisis, and create a snowball effect of increasing incursions on the powers of the judiciary under future administrations. This risks producing a ripple effect through the entire federal court system that cannot be allowed no matter how small the chance. Indeed, dissatisfaction with decisions should not lead to insistence on institutional change. I will outline 3 distinct disadvantages to our term limits and propose a counter plan that will address the harms the affirmative seeks to remedy. Our 3 disadvantages include the further erosion of the Supreme Court's code of conduct through the ongoing violation of the separation of powers, the reduced public perception of judicial legitimacy, and doctrinal instability as a result of an ever-evolving court. To resolve these disadvantages, I will conclude by laying out our counter plan, a nonpartisan model for the nomination and monitoring of Supreme Court justices. On to my first disadvantage. Linking the presidency to the judiciary violates the Constitution and the separation of powers principle, a constitutional imperative, as well as the court's own code of conduct. Dismantling the building blocks of our democracy will lead to a government our founding fathers never intended. In fact, resulted in 2 branches of government instead of 3, unraveling the underpinnings of what makes the United States of America the symbol of democracy the world over. For a running president to promise to nominate Justice X in so many words during his first year in office and Justice Y during year 3 alters the entire framework of our electoral process. Politicians would pander to the justices they will nominate instead of working across the aisle to pass legislation, since many citizens only care about who the president will nominate to the Supreme Court. We must not forget that SCOTUS, our 3rd branch of government, is an insulated legal body empowered to make decisions detached from the legislative and executive branches. Justice White observed, issues of law or fact should not be determined by popular vote. It is the business of judges to be indifferent to unpopularity. Associating our courts with politics is a dangerous road to travel, and one from which there may be no turning back. The separation of powers is deemed essential to avoid usurpation and tyranny by the holder of these powers. For instance, the prompt correction of mistakes and the protection of minorities. So Justice Sandra Day O'Connor said it best, elected judges leads the public to believe that judges are politicians in robes. We cannot afford a judiciary connected to politics and any of its incarnations. Judge Ginsburg remarked, judges are to be indifferent to popularity. Abolishing the structure of our country since its founding will lead to lawlessness, disorder, and ultimately anarchy. This is too high a price to pay for a proposal that has no guarantee of success. Our current system has served us well for over 200 years. The executive and judicial branches of government are independent and must remain so in a free and democratic country. Imposing term limits only risks exacerbating the very problem the affirmative seeks to solve. Now I'd like to turn to my second disadvantage, judicial legitimacy, which limits which term limits were reduced by increasing the perception that the court is directly tied to partisan politics and individual politicians. When presidential candidates run on platforms of potential SCOTUS appointments, super PACs, special interest groups, and the wealthy elite will elect the president who will nominate the judge aligned with their interests, not the country's. Fundraising and campaign contributions, essentially buying the judiciary, will lead to the perception of influence on future decision-making. Not only will this create an uproar within our class-divided society, it will create contentious confirmation hearings, sap the integrity of our court, and reduce judicial legitimacy. According to the Penn Research Center, up until the post-war era, SCOTUS confirmations usually were routine business. Would Judge X make a decision based on precedent, stare decisis, law, and facts, or out of loyalty to the president who ran on a promise of nominating him or her to the court? The perception of bias and political loyalty will become inescapable and inevitably damage the reputation of the Supreme Court and Americans' willingness to believe in and follow the rule of law. Our country cannot afford a loss of confidence in the courts. Let's entertain for a moment that term limits will make for better justices. The perception of those justices' legitimacy will be shot, undermining the ability for those decisions to be carried out and enforced. To quote the Duquesne Law Review, problem is the judiciary is a branch upon which we demand to act in accordance with the law, even when it is unpopular to do so. The judiciary has always been seen as protecting the minority against the tyranny of the majority. Now on to my third disadvantage, doctrinal stability. A constantly changing court will inevitably produce instability. Traditionally, the ideology of the court has slowly evolved over time. Term limits will create abrupt ideological shifts, diminished confidence in decisions, and increased perception of a political court. That is, a rapidly changing court could reverse itself over short periods. This inconsistency will delegitimize the judiciary in the eyes of both legal scholars and the American public. Dr. Sherry Insumby of the Vanderbilt School of Law found that studies suggest that lower courts are more likely to defy Supreme Court precedent if the court is ideologically distinct from the precedent-creating court, even if the Supreme Court is unlikely to overrule the precedent. Less cycling of the judges will lead to a court that makes decisions consistent with precedent and stare decisis. Absent that, lower courts can point to competing precedent in order to hollow out Supreme Court rulings and undermine the consistency of how legal standards are applied across America. The principle of stare decisis dictates that justices follow the court's prior ruling irrespective of the length of their term. Our country should not uproot the foundation of our entire political system because of one or two unpopular decisions. If we did so, we would still have school segregation, since despite Brown versus Board of Education being widely unpopular at the time, lower courts still uphold the Supreme Court decision because of doctrinal stability and the legitimacy of the court had for establishing precedent and to ensure adherence throughout the court system. As Alexander Hamilton emphasized, permanency in office is an essential pillar of judicial independence. Lifetime tenure is ensured in the Constitution's good behavior clause, meaning it is a guaranteed protected right. This also serves as a safeguard against judicial corruption that would vanish in the world of term limits, since there would be set terms laid out, limiting the ability for justices to develop consistency in relationships to effectively navigate the country forward. Finally, I present our counter plan, which sets up an independent, nonpartisan appointment process and a monitoring committee in order to ensure the ethical and mental fitness of Supreme Court justices. This will be implemented by following the code of conduct signed by the Senate justices November 13, 2023. A loose summation of canons 1 to 5 states, a justice should uphold the integrity and independence of the judiciary, promote public confidence, and refrain from political action. This will resolve several problems. First, both Antonio Scalia and Ginsburg died while sitting on the bench at 79 and 87 respectively, becoming increasingly absent as their health continued to deteriorate. Our counter plan would ensure that they could be removed or replaced with justices who can be fully committed to all their duties. Second, without monitoring ethical and mental fitness, the public may never know the kind or bias a justice might be having when issuing decisions. As Dr. Arthur Hellman states, the law clerks are extremely protective of their justice. That fact, together with the rule of confidentiality that binds all court staff, means that unless a justice's decrepitude becomes evident at oral argument sessions, outsiders are not likely to become aware that justice has reached a point where he or she should step down. Our monitoring board will not only ensure that this isn't hidden, but there is an enforcement mechanism for the very code of conduct the court has already agreed to. This transparency and lack of self-governance will shore up public confidence, ensure doctrinal stability, and while preserving the separation of powers by ensuring the Supreme Court remains fully independent from the executive instead of functionally turning into an appointed cabinet position in the affirmative world. To conclude, even a risk of any of our 3 disadvantages isn't worth it, since not only do they ensure the lack of solvency for the Supreme Court decisions by gutting their means of enforcement, but they also perpetuate a partisan world that will continue to erode the rule of law and inevitably devolve to civil war. Whereas our counter plan creates a path forward and ensures that a tripartite system of government can continue to serve our country productively as it has for over 200 years. Thank you. I now stand ready for cross-examination.
Thank you. Providing cross-examination for the affirmative team for 1 to 3 minutes, Grace Way. She's a first-year student majoring in international relations from Albuquerque, New Mexico.
So what are you guys advocating for specifically on your counter plan?
That will be addressed by my partner in this second.
Okay, great. So continuing off of that, so doesn't this require a change in the Constitution as like within the Constitution, the president is the person that appoints the Supreme Court justices?
That will be addressed through normal means.
So you're suggesting like a constitutional amendment in this case to put forward?
As are you.
No, we're not suggesting. Anyways, so again, doesn't this uproot the power of the Senate and the president? Because that's the current like status quo process.
This does not uproot any power, it gives the power back to the people, and it creates a way less political of a political environment than your term limits do.
Right.
The term limits create a very political environment. The term
But
limit,
people-
our plan does not have a political
Alright,
environment. It's
but-
a deep, nonpartisan board.
People don't vote for Supreme Court justices in the first place, right?
They
now,
vote
right?
for a president that's running on a platform of who they're gonna nominate in justice in year 1 and 3.
What do you mean by years 1 and 3?
The first year they nominate, your plan is to nominate one justice in his first year in office and one justice in the third year in office, isn't that correct?
No, I don't believe so, but
I believe that's what your partner argued.
okay, so how would the separation of power like happen? Or like decrease in separation of power happen if the president is appointing justices in the status quo? So like they're currently appointing justices, so how is that going to lead to a decrease in the separation of power?
Because they're gonna be running on a platform of who they're gonna nominate, marrying the presidency to the judiciary. You can't marry the two, there's 3 systems of government that our country has run on for
Okay.
200 years, a tripartite system of government.
Okay, so moving on to doctrinal stability, isn't there already a lot of instability in the status quo with justices currently uprooting like foundations of precedents like Roe v. Wade or affirmative action? Isn't the court already being politicized?
The court is a constantly evolving body of law.
Right,
It constantly evolves, and they make their decisions not based on popular opinion, but based on the law and the facts in
right,
front
but
of them.
currently in the status quo, wouldn't you say that they're basing their judgments on popularity and what the president is
Absolutely
appointing
not,
them?
absolutely not.
So
They're basing their-
the 6-3 conservative court isn't basing their opinions off of popularity and their political.
Absolutely
politicized
not, they're
opinion?
basing their decisions on what they take their oath, on the Constitution, on the
Right.
law and the facts in front of them.
Okay, so how has the system served the US well if their approval rating is at an all-time low comparative to any time in history?
No, not at any time of history, it was lower during the time when they banned slavery, it was at an all-time low.
Okay,
And
fine.
they made that decision against the popular vote.
That's time.
Presenting the negative teams, first rebuttal for 4 to 6 minutes, Angela Grasso, whose formal education includes UConn, Quinnipiac, Trinity College. Ms. Grasso's biggest joy in life remains the relationship with her 2 children. Professionally following in the footsteps of her grandfather and great-grandfather, Silvio Grasso, Ms. Grasso was a surety bail bond agent licensed to the Department of Insurance in Connecticut since 19 to provide for her family.
Hello, and thank you to the judges and our opponents for their thoughtful speeches. Now I will respond to the affirmative's argument regarding doctrinal instability. Our opponents argue that the term limits will put the court more in touch with society, but doing so will actually result in a world of doctrinal instability, which is far more troubling and problematic for democracy than anything the affirmative fears. Under term limits, the constant shifting and replacement of justices will result in constant revisions to the law enforcement system, as well as subsequent unpredictability around constitutional rights, which can be taken away retroactively with a new round of justices. Despite saying the court is out of touch with society now, this was the same notion the general public held in 1865 when the court ruled to abolish slavery. In this case, the court needed to be out of touch with society because the society's beliefs were racist. The fact of the matter is that the founding fathers didn't intend this branch of government to be easily swayed by public opinion, since they were supposed to rise above popular sentiment to make correct legal and moral decisions for our country. Unlike ripped jeans and bell-bottom pants, the law should not reflect the trends of the day, but rather reflect a system of justice that should stand the test of time and can be held up over a lifetime. The Supreme Court justices tend to make decisions that are roughly in line with the preferences of the president who appointed them. But over time, they become increasingly more moderate. Under a system of term limits, not only will presidents frequently be able to appoint justices who agree with them politically, they will also have greater incentive to appoint the most extreme judges, because they know that their appointees will only be able to serve for a limited amount of time. According to Dr. Suzanne Sherry and Christopher Sunby, term limits basically ensure the loyalty effect remains the strongest, the appointment of judges who will be the most loyal, which guarantees the Supreme Court remains political, thus killing the public's confidence in it, and undermining the separation of powers that enables our judicial branch to be effective, an effective check on the balance of power. Now I'll respond to the affirmative's argument that court justices' age has anything to do with their ability to rule. Our opponents believe that term limits will create a more qualified court because youth will no longer be a key factor for choice. Because this is not only historically untrue in our current system of life tenure, but is made safer by our counterplan that has a nonpartisan board ensuring the mental fitness of our judges. As it stands, the average age of a nominated justice by both parties is 49, and the average length of service is 28 years. Therefore, term limits at best shaves 10 years off their judicial service while risking all the disadvantages our counterplan can solve. Term limits won't prevent big cases like Roe v. Wade from getting overturned. Trump was not the first president to appoint several justices. Roosevelt appointed 9 and Nixon and Reagan appointed 4. Overturning Roe v. Wade merely called extra attention to the inner workings of the Supreme Court instead of any real difference in how presidential appointments have worked. Even if term limits are implemented, there is no guarantee the affirmative will get the judges appointed that they want, or more representation for each party, since it will still succumb to the will of the elections. Furthermore, they can't prevent unplanned appointments based on other circumstances that could still happen. Lastly, undermining stare decisis and the separation of power ensures that any major decision can be undone, creating a more unstable legal world for America to live in. Thank you for your time.
All right, presenting the affirmative team's first rebuttal for 4 to 6 minutes, Christopher Cheek, a senior majoring in political science who plans on going to law school from Nashville, Tennessee.
Excuse me. Hi, everybody. Let me just get my timer set up here. At its most basic level, the negative have failed to grapple with our argument that right now confirmation hearings are becoming increasingly polarized and partisan because there is a gamble that parties are making about how many justices they're going to be able to appoint in the future. This is eroding the court's legitimacy, undermining it, and also leading to doctrinal instability in the status quo. If you need evidence for that, read the news. Watch the way that the court is acting and the way that it is changing its rulings, and that is because parties don't know how many justices they're going to be able to appoint, which means that they are largely incentivized to appoint the most extreme justices that they can possibly imagine, and the youngest justices who have the most time to be on the court. Those are both bad things. We'll talk about them more a little bit later. The counterplan properly, ethics reform does not solve for this partisan fighting over confirmation because it doesn't promote equity in appointments. Parties are still having to make a choice about how many justices do we think we're going to be able to appoint, which encourages them to race to the margins with the most extreme justices. We advocate for a permutation that would impose term limits and adopt ethics reform. These two are not exclusive and would be compatible. Ethics reform also doesn't solve for justices staying on the bench for too long and leading to decreased mental acuity. Also, the ethical reform alone wouldn't solve for a larger problems with the court. That's according to the Harvard Law Review article in 2024. Quote, they regulate only the way the court conducts its business. They are unlikely to satisfy those seeking for larger impact reform, end quote. I'm going to go up to their disadvantages, as they called them. First, they talked about judicial independence and said that this violates the separation of powers. I'm not entirely sure what the understanding of this argument was. It was a little soft here. They read it. I read a quote from Sandra Day O'Connor saying that judges shouldn't be elected, which is great. The plan doesn't lead to the election of judges. Rather, it leads to a regularized process in which judges are appointed by every president, which actually takes it off of the extreme partisan side of the table, right? There's a difference between when a president lucks into having a Supreme Court nomination versus nominating like a Secretary of State every year. Obviously, there's still going to be a partisan lean, but the races to the edge is significantly less, and the incentives to do that are significantly less. There's no reason for like, I think that they're trying to argue that maybe Congress would be angry or that it would. Talked a lot about how there's separation of powers. Great, but I'm not sure how we undermine it. They haven't given a good warrant that connects the affirmative to that action, and in fact, we probably flip this because right now the court is politicized, which means there's more likely for other branches to be angry at the court and to try to strip back its power, whereas we restore the legitimacy of the court by making it more neutral. They say that we hurt judicial legitimacy because there's a perception that judges are tied to politics and there are contentious confirmation hearings, but we solve for that because term limits for regularized appointments will decrease partisan fighting during confirmation hearings. I already talked about that, but Fisher from the law, Jeffrey Fisher, who's a law professor at Stanford in 2022, wrote, quote, "The whole point of term limits would be to regularize the appointment and confirmation process to make the nominations of new justices more unremarkable and to lower the temperature. The reform would curb our worst instincts," end quote. And 18-year term limits would reduce politicization by allowing each president to nominate 2 judges per term, which means they no longer need to strategize about, this is my one chance to get a Supreme Court justice. I might not get another. I need to prove to my party and to the people who voted for me that I'm going to appoint the most extreme judge, the youngest judge that I can think of. They made an argument that, and it's not going to harm judicial independence because it's empirically denied. Every state but Rhode Island limits the tenure of state Supreme Court judges, and none of them have this problem. That's according to Jerminski, who is the dean of Berkeley Law School in 2015. Quote, "No other country in the world gives life tenures to its judiciary. Only Rhode Island does. The experience in all these places demonstrate judicial tenure is not needed for a successful constitutional democracy," end quote. This is also proven by all the other countries in the world where their Supreme Court justices have a limited term. And also, obviously, a declining court legitimacy is a greater threat to judicial independence by causing sort of other bodies to come and attack the court. They made an argument about doctrinal stability, but they don't understand our core argument that the judges are going to be less radical, which means that it is more likely that even though justices are swapping out, the change in the doctrine of the court is going to change less, and it's going to be predictable on an every 4-year limit basis, as opposed to just being whenever one of the Supreme Court justices happens to kick the bucket. The Chilton study we cited, the first affirmed, says term limits decrease ideological extremism, which should promote a stability of precedents. And modeling the effect of term limits conclude they reduce ideological imbalance and promote doctrinal stability. That's American Academy of Arts and Sciences 23. Modeling of term limit proposals has shown that they reduce the likelihood of extreme ideological imbalance in either direction on the court and lead to greater stability and predictability by decreasing variance in the number of justices appointed by each president. And there's an incentive to appoint the best and brightest to the court instead of the people who agree with you the most. Finally, they've made an argument that there's a greater incentive to bring on the most extreme judges, but they conceded that older judges are less partisan, and they have also conceded that we solve for that by increasing the average age of people who are appointed, because instead of appointing somebody who's 52 and has less experience, a president is more likely to appoint somebody who is older, more moderate, and has significantly more bench experience, which solves for this argument. The loyalty effect is empirically denied by all of the states in the United States and the other countries, which all have their own term limits, and we don't see a problem. But also the fact that these appointments are routinized is another example, because a president wants to be remembered for beating other presidents by finding amazing, excellent, super qualified Supreme Court justices rather than finding somebody who agrees with him the most. That's my time.
All right, thank you. We've now reached the halfway point of the debate. Leading us in opening the second round by presenting the negative team's second constructive argument for 6 to 8 minutes, June Seeger, charismatic, kind, and caring, mother of 3 and grandmother, also college graduate, Braille certified, while also being trained in a plethora of other skills and certifications, loving daughter and sister.
Thank you, judges, and to my opponents for their insightful responses. However, even taking into account everything the affirmative has claimed, term limits are not the answer. In my speech, I will first go on to explore the international dynamics that a change in the U.S. Supreme Court could cause. Then I will expand on our other disadvantages. Lastly, I will conclude by further explaining our counterplan. By the end, I will clearly demonstrate that term limits will only increase the problems the affirmative seeks to solve and undermine the very judicial system the affirmative wants to strengthen, requiring you to negate. Now, first, I would like to present our soft power disadvantage. The U.S. has long been a model for other countries striving to establish strong democracies. Independent courts are crucial to the democracies worldwide, allowing the U.S. to extend its influence. In fact, Chief Justice Barak of Israel wrote, "The signature innovations of the American legal system, a written constitution, a Bill of Rights protecting individual freedoms, and an independent judiciary with the powers to strike down legislation have been constantly emulated in much of the world." If the U.S. abandons this model, or is perceived to have done so, we risk weakening democracy as a whole. Perception domestically of the U.S. Supreme Court is at an all-time low, even though internationally we are still seen as strong and independent. The affirmative would undermine our credibility globally by making our court system seem like a direct outcome of elections. This continual erosion not only enables prime ministers like Netanyahu to bend the laws and circumvent legal systems, which further genocidal war policies, but also encourages other authoritarian regimes to weaken their legal protections under the guise of reform, which will further destabilize global governance. This is not hyperbole. In fact, prior to Justice Sandra Day O'Connor's retirement, she affirmed that when U.S. courts are seen to be cognizant of other judicial systems, our ability to act as a rule of law model for other nations will be enhanced. Enacted term limits at this juncture will subsequently risk locking in human rights violations, bloodshed, war, and even possible nuclear fallout. In the future, other countries will seize the same opportunity to take over their judicial systems, enabling authoritarian rule globally. Having a strong perception of an independent judiciary makes it easier for the U.S. to guide newer democracies and rallies its allies in order to help ensure international stability. Changing the way the court system functions and having the court change dramatically, president by president, would create a global perception that the U.S. is not the defender of democracy it claims to be, undermining its world leadership and ability to influence the future. In fact, according to Kala King, professor at Fordham Law School, inconsistencies could delegitimize the judiciary in the eyes of the American public, impacting the rest of the world in a moment where we cannot afford to look like another Russia packing its courts. In order to utilize our soft powers for successful negotiations, we need to be perceived as strong, and the affirmative risks undermining this. Next, I would like to expand on our doctrinal stability disadvantage. According to Dr. Susan Cherry of Vanderbilt Law School, having an 18-year term limits could wreak havoc on the doctrinal stability in a way that would undermine the ability for the court to function and make it difficult for the rest of the courts throughout the country to enforce its decisions. Lifetime appointments ensure that there is a long-term vision that is unaffected by the volatility of political whims. Term limits inject an element of unpredictability and rapid turnover of justices would make the Supreme Court decisions too closely tied to the prevailing political winds, eroding its abilities to act as an impartial arbitrator of justice. This instability, real or perceived, will have a ripple effect and undermine stare decisis by creating an inconsistent ruling and ensuring the development of case law that would make it possible for any state to ignore rulings from the Supreme Court they don't want to enforce. As my partner mentioned in her opening speech, we would not have desegregated schools in America if it were not for state courts to follow Supreme Court's rulings. This was only successful because of the steady hand of justices that superseded the racist opinions of the electorate that were popular at the time. If we undermine that stability now, even if the Supreme Court gets better, it won't have the ability to enforce its decisions down the line because it would not have the necessary long-term strength, constant case law, and perception of independence to get other courts to follow. This both takes out any hope of solvency for the affirmative, as well as creates an external impact by enabling popular sentiment. Regardless of, however, discriminatory, to win out over a legal system that can endure making unpopular decisions with the power to protect human rights. Lastly, I will extend on our counterplan. Not only does our counterplan avoid the links to our other disadvantages, it also solves the affirmative's harms. It bolsters the necessary trust to ensure the fair appointment of judges. the implementation of unethical standards, and also monitor mental fitness of judges while they serve on the bench. This would add an accountability measure as well as a system of checks and balances. This better addresses political corruption and potential influence that does the affirmative's implementation of term limits. It solves the major concerns of the debate by erasing the partisan infighting around the Supreme Court, thereby restoring trust in the U.S. judicial branch, both domestically and internationally, as it wouldn't be determined purely by politics. This means that even if the affirmative is correct and the confidence in the court is low in the status quo, our counterplan will increase confidence via a nonpartisan election process. The public's perception of a strong judiciary solves our disadvantage by demonstrating a legal system guided by ethical standards and longevity instead of short-term elections. This ultimately creates a better method of transparency and will better promote public confidence. Therefore, you must negate term limits.
Presenting the affirmative team's second constructive argument for 6 to 8 minutes, Avery DeBose, a junior majoring in political science and communication from Louisville, Kentucky.
Thank you, judges, and thank you for your arguments. In this speech, the affirmative will highlight 3 major benefits to enacting 18-year term limits. Our first argument is that 18-year term limits are necessary for restoring public respect for the Supreme Court. In October 2024, the Supreme Court began its new term with its lowest public approval ever recorded. Philip Timothea, a reporter for The Hill, stated on December 17, 2024 that, quote, an October survey from the Annenberg Public Policy Center of the University of Pennsylvania found the public's trust in the U.S. Supreme Court dropped to a record low. The poll discovered that 56% of Americans said that they somewhat disapprove of the nation's highest court, end quote. Another shocking poll came from Gallup this December. It found that Americans have a record low confidence in our judicial system, with only 35% expressing confidence. That represents a decline from a 42% confidence level in 2023 and a whopping 24% decline from a 59% confidence level in 2020. What accounts for this alarming decline in the trust that the American people have with the Supreme Court? The explanation is that lifetime tenure has resulted in a Supreme Court who no longer represents the views of a majority of the American people. Due to term limits, the composition of the Supreme Court no longer reflects the outcome of presidential elections. Despite losing 5 of the last 8 presidential elections, the Republicans have appointed 6 of the 9 judges. Kermit Roosevelt, a constitutional law professor at the University of Pennsylvania, observed in 2024 that if each president had appointed 2 justices, as would be the case under the 18-year term limits plan, then the composition of the court would be 6-3 in favor of the Democrats. He concludes that, quote, this stark divergence between national elections and control of the court is what makes the current court seem extreme and political, end quote. In recent years, the Supreme Court has made numerous rulings that are far outside the mainstream on civil rights, gun rights, and abortion. Alicia Bannon and Michael Milov-Cordova of the Brennan Center argue that by handing down rulings which, quote, are unmoored from the values of the American public, unquote, it is not surprising that public confidence in the court has plummeted. During last year's term, the radical Supreme Court handed down 2 rulings that were contrary to precedent and made the courts appear blatantly political. By overturning the Chevron doctrine, which had afforded administrative agencies deference for interpreting statutes, the Supreme Court overruled decades of precedent and held that the federal courts would have the last word on the validity of federal agency rules. And most astonishing of all, the Republican-appointed justices gave Donald Trump a get-out-of-jail-free card by granting him unqualified immunity from criminal prosecution for so-called official acts. David Rudenstein, Cardozo law professor, remarked on January 10, 2025, that the court's immunity ruling, quote, rejected the profound concerns of the framers who worried that the abuses of European monarchs might infiltrate the newly established office of the American presidency, end quote. The loss of court legitimacy is harmful as it erodes compliance with the rule of law. Daniel Epps, Washington University law professor, explained in 2022 that, quote, there needs to be some willingness of the losing side to believe that adhering to the existing rules for resolving disputes will ultimately be more advantageous than refusing to honor those rules. For social peace, we need people to believe that it is better to continue living under existing arrangements, however imperfect, rather than trying to burn them down, end quote. Adopting 18-year term limits whereby each president is allowed to nominate 2 justices will be a vast improvement over the status quo and will restore the legitimacy of the court. Kermit Roosevelt III, constitutional law at the University of Pennsylvania, observed in 2024 that, quote, a system of 18-year terms for justices where each president gets 2 appointments per 4-year term, end quote, is a structural fix that would, quote, ensure that the court comes back in line with the constitutional vision of the American people, end quote. A second benefit to enacting 18-year term limits is that it will improve judicial decision making. This is so for 2 reasons. First, allowing judges to remain on the court for long periods of time risks having judges who are out of touch with contemporary events. Diane Wood, a director of American Law Institute and a former chief judge of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 7th Circuit, argued in 2024 that, quote, today's Supreme Court risks turning into a place that is out of touch with the outside world, as more and more justices serve 20, 30, or even 40 years. The world is changing at breakneck speed, to the extent that it leaves justices in the dust. People with little or no experience with electronically stored information, with the internet revolution, and with advances in medicine, we have a problem. Now, there's artificial intelligence to deal with. Turnover in these circumstances is a good thing. Term limits offer a better balance between stability and growth than the status quo. In addition, an additional reason why faster turnover of judges will improve judicial decision making is that it will infuse the court with fresh ideas and perspectives. Alicia Bannon and Michael Muller-Cordova of the Brennan Center argue that social science research shows that organizations greatly benefit from fresh voices and changes in interpersonal dynamics. Moreover, they claim that entrenched leadership often leads to poorer decision making. Therefore, they conclude that, quote, more frequent turnover in the court would be likely to improve judicial decision making, end quote. A third advantage to 18-year term limits is that it will enhance the diversity on the court. Sadly, the current membership of the Supreme Court is deeply unrepresentative of the American people and the legal profession. Alicia Bannon and Michael Muller-Cordova of the Brennan Center observed in 2023 that, quote, there has never been an Asian American or Native American nor an openly LGBTQ+ justice, end quote. Moreover, among the sitting justices, all but one attended Harvard or Yale, and Justice Jackson is the only justice to have worked as a public defender. With more frequent appointments, Bannon and Muller-Cordova argue that presidents could bring greater diversity to the court. Promoting greater diversity on the court will be beneficial, they say, quote, because courts that reflect the diversity of the communities they serve inspire public confidence, enhance deliberations among judges, produce a richer jurisprudence, and create role models for underrepresented groups, end quote.
Presenting the affirmative team's second rebuttal for 3 to 5 minutes, John Sexton.
Okay, starting on my first opponent's point about soft power, they make a really big logical jump here in claiming that, yes, the US is a model for other countries, but the problem is they immediately assume that we're decreasing the independence of the court. I'll tell you that this is just not true at all. First of all, I would tell you that this is empirically denied. Judicial independence is not harmed in other countries with term limits. This is Bannon and Muller-Cordova from the Brennan Center in 2023. Hamilton defended life tenure as necessary to protect the court from the political branches of the government, but as borne out of experience of every other major democracy in the world, there's no evidence that long renewable terms pose a threat to judicial independence, end quote. Secondly, we tell you every state but Rhode Island limits the tenure of state Supreme Court justices. That's Komarinsky of Dean of Berkeley Law School 2015 that my partner read in his previous speech. No other country in the world gives tenure to its judiciary, only Rhode Island does, yet the experience in all these places demonstrates that judicial life tenure is not needed for a successful constitutional democracy, end quote. Next, I would also tell you that we would solve better looking to our own plan. If you look in the status quo right now, we would tell you that confidence in the Supreme Court is the lowest it's ever been since 1972. This is solely because it's not actually independent and our opponents aren't really solving anything. Now, let's go to their point about doctrinal instability. First of all, I would tell you that they don't interact with our arguments at all. First of all, I would tell you that we have more predictable turnover in our world versus the unknown scenario. This creates less polarized judges and more doctrinal stability because in our world, the presidents know exactly when they're going to have new justices, and so they're more incentivized to choose someone who's more qualified and less politicized. As my partner mentioned before, they want their legacy to be remembered in a good way from choosing a qualified judge, and so they're less incentivized to choose someone extreme. Secondly, we would tell you that there's less to prove to their own party because of this exact reason, and so because this will have more doctrinal stability in our scenario. But if you still don't believe me, I would give you some more evidence, starting with the Chilton study that we stated in our first affirmative, states that term limits decrease ideological extremism. This promotes stability of precedents. There's more certainty in our world, which is exactly why this occurs. But secondly, I would tell you that studies modeling the effect of term limits conclude that they reduce ideological imbalance and promote doctrinal stability. That's the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 2023. Modeling of term limit proposals has shown that they generally reduce the likelihood of extreme ideological imbalance in either direction of the court, leading to greater stability and predictability by decreasing variance in the number of justices appointed by each president, end quote. Now, finally, let's go to their counter plan. They try to say that they can solve with ethical change and mental monitoring, but I would tell you that their counter plan is not independent to our own plan. I would tell you just do this ethical monitoring, but also combine it with the plan of having term limits, because as we've been trying to prove to you, term limits are the actual problem that we're debating. Now, going back onto why our scenario is better, I would tell you that this is more of a try or die scenario. The neg is trying to paint that the app is the existential risk, but I would tell you in this case, it's actually the negative that's the real problem. Look to the status quo. As we keep telling you, confidence in the Supreme Court is the lowest it's ever been since 1972, according to the Gallup and Pew poll. This is solely because the court isn't independent and the court is highly politicized. We would tell you that there's no there's not approval and it's extremely polarized. Look to the instability and the fact of abortion being overturned, gun rights being overturned, and affirmative action being overturned. This is all stated in our case before. Now, finally, I would tell you just prefer the plan in general. When you look to the 18-year term limit that we proposed, we first of all tell you it creates more qualified judges, because under a term limit scenario, presidents can choose older judges who have more experience and are generally more qualified to serve, rather than trying to pander their opinion to someone who's around 50 who they think can just serve for the longest amount of time. This also creates more extreme judges in their scenario, because what we see right now is they want someone to serve for as long as possible and they don't know when they're going to get another appointment. And so the logic behind the president is, oh, I'm going to choose someone who's extremely extreme rather than who's very extreme, rather than someone who is, say, more qualified or less polarized on a political scale. For all of these reasons, we would tell you to vote affirmative. Thank you.
Presenting the negative team's second rebuttal for 3 to 5 minutes, Brianna Triplett. Brianna is a New Haven native and small business owner. Before incarceration, Ms. Triplett traveled to 12 countries, took care of 3 good kids, and worked in a hospital for over a decade. She has indulged in many academic endeavors in her life, but this debate is a first of its kind for her, and she is ready to add this competition to her academic journey.
Thank you, judges, for your time. Thank you to my opponents for your arguments. First, our opponent claims public respect for the Supreme Court is on a decline. I will show that this is untrue. If the general population witnesses judges jockeying for appointments and trying to win the favor of the politicians, especially the party in power, it will be impossible for people not to see the Supreme Court as explicitly political and undermine confidence in the court. Turning judicial appointments into a political contest will hurt the public's opinion and the entire judicial system, which will create instability by undermining the confidence in the rule of law and the willingness to abide by court decisions. With multiple wars going on and increased domestic partisanship, now is not the time to experiment with term limits and make our court system appear even more political than it already does, sending us over the brink and potentially collapsing our entire judicial system. My opponent claims term limits will cause extreme ideological imbalance. However, they are wrong. Allowing each president to nominate 2 justices does not prevent the politicalization in the court. In fact, if one party wins 2 or 3 selections in a row, then the Supreme Court will become even more one-sided than it is now. This increased politicalization will allow the justices to be increasingly tied to the agenda of the president, with nothing to stop them from being just an extension of the executive branch, collapsing our separation of powers. As Chief Justice Rehnquist explained, if the President of the United States has something to say about the membership of the court, they are thereby indirectly affecting its decisions. The loyalty effect is the greatest in the first few years after being appointed, which means the justices appointed in the world of term limits will have them serve at that point in their careers where they are most indebted to the president who appointed them. Lifetime appointments solve this loyalty effect and ensures that the court can't be just packed by one party that happens to win a few elections in a row. In fact, according to Lawrence Goldstein, author of the several books on constitutional law, states that our lifetime appointment judgments become increasingly independent from political pressures in a way that would be impossible if there were term limits. My opponents claim that term limits will improve judicial decision. However, they are mistaken. The firm contends that life tenure prohibits fresh perspectives, perpetuates an ivory tower. This is not true. What life tenure actually does is allow for the legal doctrine of stare decisis is preserved from decision to decision, as my partner mentioned in her opening constructive speech. This ensures fairness and clarity in the law. Chief Justice John Roberts states that stare decisis is necessary to avoid arbitrary discretion in the courts, and is the key thing that distinguishes judicial decision-making from political and legislative processes. This kind of thoughtful and dependable decision-making creates a consistency that Americans can depend on rather than judges deferring to trendy choices and fresh perspectives, which undermines the long-term stability of the Supreme Court and the ability for the judiciary to have the legitimacy to enforce its decisions. Our forefathers understood that lifetime tenure ensures the Supreme Court can base their decisions on fact and law rather than popularity. This is what was instrumental in ensuring we had the power to enforce desegregation, as my partner talked about in her speech. This is more important than any of the affirmative impacts, since it is the only possibility we have to ensure that we can prevent the tyranny of the majority. Last, I will further our argument pertaining to the courts being deeply misrepresented. While the affirmative claim term limits will limit corruption and racial biases, term limits will only contribute to worsen the ethical concerns that already plague the court, while our counterplan assures a better method to tackle the problems. According to Maggie Jo Buchanan, former senior director and senior legal fellow of the Women's Initiative, individuals appointed under a term limit scheme are likely to be more corrupt than current justices. Term limits give justices even more reason to indulge in unethical financial and political incentives to set themselves up for their next career move. In the status quo, there is nothing that prevents a corrupt justice from abusing their power and influence while accepting luxury trips, home renovations, or free tuition for their kids. The affirmative plan does not change that, but rather only makes it more likely. However, our counterplan has an independent accountability board to ensure that the Supreme Court is adhering to its ethical standards and aren't acting in corrupt ways. Neither the status quo or the world of term limits provides this, which means our counterplan has an independent means of holding judges accountable and ensuring that the ethics of the court is more than just a pledge of self-restraint. Hence, we're the only one who ensures that any amount of bipartisan appointment and independent screening beyond elections and paying politics. For this reason, our counterplan is better at ensuring a system of checks and balances while restoring faith in the court that can increase the legitimacy and prevent corruption in the future. In conclusion, we cannot implement term limits in our plan because our plan is based on a completely nonpartisan committee to appoint judges. This keeps the checks and balances between the three branches of government. And even if we could, it doesn't answer any of our disadvantages. The counterplan does not require a change in the Constitution, only the creation of a bipartisan committee who can take the time to appoint the best justices for America.
That's time. Sorry.
Thank you.
All right, now both teams will present closing remarks for 90 seconds, beginning with the affirmative team from BC, Grace Webb.
All right. Judges, what you have to recognize is that the system is already imbalanced and broken, and so you have a net benefit for voting for term limits in this case. And so they give you a bunch of like disads of separation of power in the judiciary legitimacy, doctrinal stability, and US soft power, but it all boils down to basically doctrinal stability. We say that this argument, one, is non-unique because it's already happening in the status quo, and ideological extremism is like decreased in the AFS term because we are having a routine, we're working like a well-oiled machine, basically having the stability and having consistent like 18-year term limits leads to doctrinal stability. Also, moving on to their counter plan, again, like none of this is really fleshed out in their case on who's doing the appointments for this ethics board and who is like electing the people to be on this board and like what their qualifications are. And so we're saying that we can have their ethics boards too alongside our term limits. These two can go together and like work together. And so they also don't tell you how term limits leads to polarization because you're fighting over power all of this time, and like they don't tell you how that actually gets there. And so what we're saying is that polarization already happens again in the status quo, and having politicized ideas is already happening in the status quo. And so by providing term limits, it's going to get rid of this polarizing and politicized idea. And life tenure, again, is not the same idea as fairness. If they want fairness, there would be more opportunities to appoint more justices and bring more of a variety of ideas into the courts. And so term limits decrease ideological extremism because they promote precedents, which is again not happening in the status quo. We see that major precedences have been broken over the past couple of years because of this heavily conservative court. And because of this, again, having the status quo and not having term limits reduces
Sorry, that's time.
Thank you.
All right, we will now hear the negative team's closing remarks from Envoy's Chastity West.
The negative team has won this debate by pointing out one insurmountable disadvantage that the affirmative has understandably failed to overcome. That is how term limits violate the separation of powers principle. Our opponents mocked our argument, but never managed to answer the real issue, the dangers of linking the judiciary with politics. Here we are at closing arguments, and our opponents at best have distracted you with their best hypothesis, the whimsical world of term limits where every 2 years you get a justice, you get a justice, you get a justice. That simply doesn't work. Even if term limits diversify the court, that comes with consequences that would rock our democracy to its core on both the domestic and international front. Bottom line, the affirmative arguments don't solve. Term limits not only undermine the values of our legal system, they also reflect the crumbling values of our society where we no longer value those senior to us in years of experience. Life tenure outfits the court with the most qualified people possible. It's counterintuitive to retire judges after 18 years of service. The average age of a Supreme Court justice appointee is 53. Orange is the new black, and apparently 73 is the new expired. We don't claim that the present system is perfect, but it's stable and makes for a strong and functioning court. Our counter plan, which ensures a method of independent, nonpartisan appointment and a way to monitor the ethical and mental fitness of justices, only makes it better. It also resolves several major issues. Do you say time? Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so that's our debate. The judges will now tally the scores. They'll send them over to Chief Judge Jared Atchison, and he will announce when he's ready. So they will go off camera to calculate their scores. In the meantime, I did just want to acknowledge 2 additional team members who did not have speaking roles, but who participated in last semester's debate, and were also critical supports for the team here. And that's Marvian Duncan, who's prior to her incarceration obtained a master's degree in business with a concentration in HR management from the University of Connecticut. She also holds a bachelor's degree in business administration, enjoys reading, gardening, traveling, and spending quality time with her loved ones. The second individual also who was critical to helping the team and participated last semester is Mary Ames, a Wesleyan graduate, formerly certified in restorative justice practices and multicultural leadership. She serves her community as an Indigenous firekeeper, mentor, and group facilitator. She's passionate about the environmental protection, public policy, and ending the fentanyl crisis. While the judges tally the score, we usually open this time for either coach or students to simply make any thoughts or comments about your experience today in this debate. And if you have anything additional to say, Joe, I'm looking at you
Yeah,
first.
I'll jump up,
This
yeah.
started off.
Yeah, I'm gonna look at the team as opposed to the camera, but this is my second time coaching this institute, and I think that you get stronger each time I work with you, and it's amazing to see, how you're able to keep up with things, and then, handwriting your notes, and then being able to revise things, and then being able to interact. It's really impressive, what you all do, and to have not the electronic resources and still be able to keep up with college teams and be able to interact with them. It's truly impressive. And whether I'm coaching and judging at the college level or I'm doing debates like this, these are the ones that are really sort of meaningful and allows for interaction and dialogue, that allows us to sort of see across the aisle and know that we're all people and we can have dialogue and communication in civil ways, even when we disagree over things like politics. And I've really appreciated being able to work with you all this semester, and for the ones of you who were there last year, can't wait to start up another season with you, and thank you so much for doing that, and thank you all for Boston College for coming and creating such a great debate. It was wonderful to have you all come in and participate with our team, so thank you so much, and of course, thank you to our wonderful judges as well, so thanks a lot.
Thank you, Joe.
Okay, I would like to say thank you to our coach every week showing up, and thank you also to Counselor Hutchins for her tireless weekly commitment to all of this. Thank you to our opponents for coming to this prison and debating with us as equals. It is very much appreciated. And to everybody else who came to witness, and to everybody else on the internet who's probably watching, thank you for taking the time to listen to our arguments. Even though we are incarcerated, we are still people, and we appreciate your time. Thank you.
Hi, I too want to thank everybody for your time, for your commitment, for your support, especially to you for coming in here with us. Your arguments, your presentations were wonderful and thoughtful, and so we appreciate that, because iron sharpens iron, right? You only make us better, so thank you for that. I'm a big believer that nobody is neutral in life. You're part of the problem or you're part of the solution. And everyone in this room is a big part of the solution, and I'm very grateful for that. So thank you for letting me be a part of this.
I'm John Katsoulis. I'm the BC coach. I also coached the Connecticut women last year with Joe. This year I'm coaching the Connecticut guys at Cheshire. I'm also the treasurer of the NPDL. I brought the trophy. That's the
Our
important thing not to
trophy.
forget.
Thank you.
I noticed a lot of the ladies had handwritten notes. Well, I'm glad to report that you should be getting new computers, hopefully, where you'll be able to type your speeches. I have doctor's handwriting. I can't even read my handwriting. I really it's not this tight. So this is a good debate topic. We debated this topic last year at the ACC tournament. I've had it at BC in a public debate topic. I think it's a good topic. It's a balanced topic. They're good arguments, kind of on both sides. I thought both teams had presented the strongest arguments for their side, and I thought I congratulate everybody for having a good, lively debate.
Thank you.
Hi. So yeah, I just wanted to say thank Brittany, it's such an honor to be able to like have experiences like this, because like this is such an insulated world and it's filled with drama and really nothing productive. And anywhere you turn in here, you know, you really have to, it's an everyday struggle to be positive in a place that's so negative and to try to be better than your surroundings. And I just thank you so much for, like, I'm in the same school that Dr. Mary, like, you know, there's no neutral position, and you're either part of the solution or not. And it's just overwhelming for me, you know, to like see people who would like engage with us in this way, and that would take time, their own time and stuff, to like engage with us in this way and to like come and, you know, share space with us. So I really appreciate that. And this is what I've been here for a very, very long time, and things like this like really keep me going, and it really fortifies me, and it really energizes me and inspires me to pay it forward. So your energy, your time, your experience, your willingness, like it really goes a long way. And thank you so much. Thank you so much for bringing that here.
Hi, I'm Beth. Tessie and I have been here the same length of time, and I want to thank everybody. Thank you for your insightful arguments, and you know, for giving us something to think about and for challenging us. It's we try to do everything we can in here to raise ourselves up, and this is a great opportunity that just opened up with Council Ramos and Council Supervisor Ramos, I'm sorry, and Council Hutchins to be part of the NPDL. I'm proud and honored to be a part of it. You know, we have Wesleyan University, we have the universities here. We didn't used to have all that 10 years ago, and this is like a great opportunity, and this is the second time that we've been able to do this. So I want to thank everybody that's come to support us, everybody that's watching, you know, giving us this opportunity. It's been a challenge, and it's been an honor, and I'm really, I feel great, you know, being able to do this, you know, nervous, and but thank you so much. Thank you for everyone that put it forward. And
Hi, I just wanted to say thank you to my teammates for helping try to build confidence in each other and understanding that our differences make us unique, but they also bring us together. Same with the outside world, you know, just because we're different doesn't make us different. I want to thank everyone that was involved in orchestrating this and everyone that came.
Yeah, it doesn't look like we have a score yet.
No, while the judges are still tallying scores, if any of the judges who have completed their scoring want to weigh in, Jared, if you're available for any comments, floor is yours, sir.
Awesome. I wanted to quickly make sure the other judges had my email address. They're good to go. Mine's tallied, and I think as soon as we get the other two, I'll log back on. I just want to say this is the third time I've gotten a chance to judge a debate, and I want to comment on something my colleagues have said, which is they just keep getting better. And it felt like early on, we were really excited about watching people develop and harness voices on both sides and participate with each other. But now we're getting genuine refutation. We're getting people who have the expertise of background knowledge, not just the evidence. They're using the evidence to support their arguments rather than just having evidence. And I think that's true for both sides in this particular debate. So it's just been a joy. I had the privilege of judging the very first one, and to have that now to this fast forward to the third debate now that I've judged, it's amazing. It's exciting. Congratulations to all of you all. And I will mute my camera. And when I come back again, that'll be whenever the judges have sent me their data and we're ready to go.
Okay, thank you very much, Jared. And I just want to, before I open the floor back up, I'd really also like to acknowledge our incredible assistant director, Brittany Lamar, who's really brought
Yeah.
NPDL to Connecticut. So she's being very, very humble, but she is been a maverick in breaking down barriers to bring NPDL programming to Connecticut. And as Joe said, we have another amazing debate lined up in Cheshire next week, in which Binghamton, I believe, will be making the trip in person. So we love breaking down barriers at the NPDL, and I've heard all of your amazing inspirational comments thus far. And I just want to say, like, you don't have to thank us. Like, we're grateful to be able to highlight not just your humanity, but your incredible brilliance and talents that not everyone gets to see, right? So that's what breaking down barriers is about, and illuminating that. And thank you to Boston College, who's been an amazing partner since we launched, always working with us and also being willing to break down barriers socially as we build this amazing community of practice that we have. And we thank our DOC partners as well. It takes everybody to put in the effort. So we thank everybody. And with that said, is there anyone else who would like to talk about this experience from their point of view, or any other thoughts about what this experience has meant to you beyond just the nuts and bolts of the debate itself?
Yeah, I have one more thing to add. Not to influence the judges' votes, but the CEO told us that if we don't win the debate, he's gonna shake our rooms down. Oh, Chelsea.
Hey, that's real. That's real. I had a similar experience when we started in Massachusetts, and the superintendent came to see me at work, and I definitely felt the pressure to perform. So, Danielle, are your scores tallied? Would you like to talk about this experience for the debaters?
I am. I'm in. I thought this was an excellent debate. I was really excited to judge on this topic because I do teach criminal law, and I've just been teaching this to my college students. I think this is a great topic. I think everybody did such a good and thoughtful job of engaging this topic, which was really, really fun for me to get to do from a professional perspective. I haven't judged a lot of debates on the sort of courts proper. It's been a hot minute since college has debated it. And so I had a really good time. I think I'm so impressed by how well both teams were able to really grapple with each other's arguments and engage in clash too, which is really fun to judge. When you all are very, very good at interacting with each other's arguments, it makes our job a lot easier. It took me a long time because I am incapable of doing math, and so I had to re-add my points like 6 times. But so that's what took me so long. But it made it a very fun debate to judge because you all were so good at engaging each other's arguments, which was great.
Hi, yes, I'm also very bad at math. I thought that this was incredible. I feel very privileged to be able to be a part of it. I was actually talking to some colleagues today because I had this time blocked off on my calendar. And it got a lot of conversation going, and a lot of really positive conversation going about how we at Fairmont State can maybe engage some of these populations a little bit more too, because we kind of have some programs started, but maybe introducing debate into some of those. But I thought everyone did an incredible job. Absolutely. How you were able to on the fly refute with everyone with just paper, because in the college debate world they have their computers and they have all of their things. You just did it off what people were saying, and listening is such an important part of deliberation and debate, and everyone did such a great job.
Hey, Samantha, can I get you to check? I don't see it in my email quite yet. Can you triple check that it went to me and didn't bounce back?
It says it went to you.
All right. How about the chat function? Is there a way to do that just to me so we can?
Jared, so we did it in a Google spreadsheet, so I can actually copy and paste Samantha's ballot into.
Oh, just showed up. We're good. We're
Oh,
good. Just
never
showed
mind.
up.
Okay.
Perfect timing. How about that? Okay. Do we have everyone? Okay.
Excuse me, sir, before you announce the winner, you did pose the question a moment ago about if anybody wanted to make a comment that didn't directly relate to this debate itself. And one of the things that I observed this year, because I'm a second year person here, was last year I was very invested in believing that I had to believe in the side that I was gonna argue. But because of that experience that I had last year and the critical thinking that goes along with being able to understand both sides of an argument, when that same question was posed this year, I didn't have an opinion. I was completely neutral to be able to argue on either side. And that to me is like a huge life skill, obviously. And then that translated to my friends and family in the outside world when they asked me about the topic and they were like, well, give me the two best arguments, one on each side. And I was able to do that. So that's some of the stuff that's happening underneath this program that's so impactful and that I'm personally so grateful for. So thank you.
All right, well, with that
You
amazing.
can tell us we won.
Yeah, exactly. With that amazing introduction having been said, this was an incredibly close debate. One of the judges said it was the difference of 0.5. That's how close it is. I'm trying to build the drama up here for you all. An incredibly close debate. That being said, the judges were unanimous on a 3-0 decision for the team from the negative from Envoy. Congratulations on an outstanding debate. We had a phenomenal time getting a chance to judge. I don't want to speak for the other judges, but I'll speak for myself and say congratulations, amazing work.
We should all.
All right,
Thank you so much.
thank you all. We'll
Thank
shake hands here and wrap up. Daniel, I don't know if you have final words, but I think that's it for today.
No, I just want to again commend everybody for trusting the process. I know how difficult this is, and from both sides, even BC is adopting our formatting. And so just thank you for, again, continuing to help us fulfill our mission to decarcerate minds on both sides of the wall. And stay tuned, check our website, npdl.org, to log in and sign up for next week's debate in Cheshire against Binghamton University. But thank you guys, enjoy this. And we'll see you again soon for the spring season. Have a great one.
Last year's score sheet, and last year we won by